recording. Well, hey guys, welcome to the Military Wire with Mike Schindler. This is the podcast where we get to interview some of America's most amazing men and women who have served this country in uniform. And we get to pick their brains on what works for them post military service, but also we kind of unpack and explore some of the things that they did in the military and then what they're doing post-military so that you guys have just something to shoot for, something to look forward to. I want to put a shout out to our sponsors this time, Honor Bound Coffee, great coffee. $2 of every purchase goes back to the mission, which is incredible and impressive. So check those guys out. So our guest today is somebody that I love having on our show, best-selling author Brad Taylor. Before I get to unpacking Brad's latest book, which I'm really excited about, I'll give you a little history on Brad, and I should know this by heart because he's been on our show like 3 times. But Brad, I got to read it. So, born in Okinawa, Japan, grew up on 40 acres in Texas, if I remember that correct. Graduated from University of Texas, commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army in the infantry. Served more than 21 years in our world's greatest armies. Retired out as a Special Forces lieutenant colonel. A number of different infantry special forces positions, 8 years with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, Delta, where he commissioned some multiple troops, squadrons. Final assignment was assistant professor of military science at the Citadel, which my daughter got an offer from, which she informed me that, Dad, I'm not going to the Citadel. Oh, well. Holds a master's of science in defense analysis. On concentration with irregular warfare. And in 2011, you published your debut novel, One Rough Man, which went to success, launched the Pike Logan series, which I love Pike. We'll dive into that. And more than 15 installments, more than 3 million copies sold. You've hit the New York bestseller list a number of times, and you and your family live in one of the world's greatest places, one of my favorite places, Charleston, South Carolina. Brad, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You know, I'm like a junkie on the Brad Taylor. I got, and I'm looking forward to this latest one. So tell me, I mean, it's been a while. We had COVID that kind of broke a lot of things up. What'd you end up doing during this time?
Well, I had a book. Actually, I did the research. You just held up American Trader. I'd gone to Taiwan and Australia and done the on-the-ground research and came home to write the book right when COVID hit.
Wow.
And so writing that book was a little bit of a challenge because I was kind of like, you write about current events and this is current.
Yeah.
So everything that I saw, I was in Schindler night market in Taiwan, which had 1,000 people there. Well, now it was empty. I was on the Sydney Harbor right next to the Opera House doing a surveillance scene, and well, now there's nobody walking around. So my biggest challenge was, how do I do this? So I cheated and just said, I'm going to set this book right when I was there and not now that I'm writing it.
Yeah.
Because the whole world had shifted at that point.
Yeah. Boy, talk about a VUCA moment. I mean, the whole world finally experienced, I think, in some ways, what we go through as veterans, right? When we transition out or when we're serving, like, all the plans are disrupted constantly. And now the world was experiencing that. So I want to talk to you really about what got you interested in writing in the first place. Like 3 million copies sold, that's exceptional as an author. Very few authors reach that platitude. You've reached it. You continue to reach it. You continue to write bestsellers. What got you interested in writing in the first place?
I honestly, it was just something it was like a bucket list thing. I've always been a voracious reader.
Yeah.
And I always said to myself, one of these days, I'm going to write a novel. I mean, I had no intention of becoming a published author. I mean, in the back of your head, you're obviously thinking, wouldn't it be great if I was published? But I was just going to write a novel. And you mentioned my last assignment there at the Citadel. I left a special mission unit at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I was deployed constantly, especially since 9/11. And I got down to teach. And while it was rewarding, it was like, stepping off a bullet train and low crawl. I mean, I had more time on my hands. I knew what to do with. It's 9 to 5. You're teaching classes. You teach 3-4 classes a day, but the classes themselves are rinse and repeat. Once you create the class, you teach the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
And I just had a ton of time on my hands. So I spent a lot of time. I developed some adaptive leadership exercises for the cadets in downtown Charleston. I did a lot of, which involved the police and the Coast Guard and everybody. It was a
Yeah.
lot of fun. But I was like, 9 in the morning, I'd be chomping at the bit going, what do we do now?
Yeah.
And so I came home and told my wife, hey, I'm going to write a book. And she was like, whatever, go ahead and write a book. And so I did. And to my surprise, it sold. I mean, I thought it'd sit on my nightstand and my mom would say, you're a really good writer, Brad. And that'd
Yeah.
be about the end of it. And it sold. So I had to make a decision. I came out on the promotion list for Colonel. I was supposed to go to Southwest Asia for 2 years unaccompanied. My daughter was entering high school. I was doing a counterterrorism thing. And I had a book. And so I couldn't publish a book if I was still in the military because I was going back to my world. And so I decided to give writing a try. I turned down the promotion, retired from the military, and the rest is history. It worked out. Nobody's more surprised than me.
Wow, no kidding. Jeez, talk about just stepping on the edge of your comfort zone too. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess you'd kind of been prepared for that anyway, just being, with special operators, always edge of your comfort zone stuff. But I mean, your wife was totally cool with it. Like you said, hey, I'm going to retire, write a book. And she's like, hey, yeah, sure.
Well, no, she wasn't. We had long discussions. She was cool with it in the sense that when I said that, I'm going back to Fort Bragg, and by the way, my
Yeah.
next assignment's Pakistan, and I'm not going to see you for 2 years. She
Mm.
actually said, if you wanted to go back to Fort Bragg, you shouldn't have brought me to Charleston. I mean, you
Oh,
don't realize the stress you're under. When you're
yeah.
at Fort Bragg, everybody's doing the same thing you are. You think it's normal.
Yeah.
I mean, you're constant deployments, constant threats, of bodily injury, all that stuff is just a normal day at the office.
Yeah.
And then we got down to Charleston. I was kind of like, so this is how everybody lives.
Yeah.
This is what goes on in the real world. So there was a lot. It was a hard decision because you don't want to leave. And we talked about it a long time and decided to do it. She was a daughter of an Air Force wing commander. She went to 4 high schools in 4 years. Was always a new kid. Dad was always moving. That's what was going to happen to me. And my daughter was entering high school. There was a lot of just competing interests. And
Yeah.
so we made a decision to do it.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is so great. So I love Pike and Jennifer. I'm a huge fan of the characters that you've developed. And I got to ask, because every time I'm reading about Pike, I'm thinking, okay, Brad, who is this person based off of? So tell me, who is Pike? Who's Jennifer? How do you do character development? Because, I do some work in Hollywood. You're always developing characters some way. And in writing, like you write brilliantly. Like I'd love to see these books come to the big screen. I mean,
Sure.
I would love it. So tell me, who's Pike and who's Jennifer?
Well, Pike's kind of an amalgamation of people I served with. He's not any single individual.
Yeah.
He's certainly not me. I get asked all the time, are you Pike Logan? And I'm like, no, I'm kind of Pike Logan's pinky toe. Yeah. I mean, the best way to look at it, I mean, I did serve, in special forces, and I did serve in a special mission unit. But at the end of the day, there's always a cut line.
Yeah.
So there's probably 1% of the planet that could play on the PGA Tour. I mean, just 1% that could even make the PGA Tour. And there's Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that name. Well, there's also somebody who's 100th on the money list. Nobody's ever heard of. He's in that 1%. He's playing on the tour.
Yeah.
But I'm the guy that's 100th on the money list, and Pike Logan is Tiger Woods.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's I so love it. So let's talk about your latest books coming out in January 2024, if I'm not mistaken.
January 23rd.
Okay. Edge of your seat thriller, but goes against Putin and his henchmen.
Yeah.
So this seems pretty relevant. So tell us a little bit about this latest book, Dead Man's Hand, that's coming out.
Yeah, I actually don't. I wasn't going to write about Ukraine. I still do security contracting, so I'm always keeping my eye on what's going around the world. So I know a lot about the Ukraine conflict, but I wasn't going to write about it. I mean, it was just like, that's just too, because anything could go wrong.
Yeah.
With that conflict, and your whole book is kind of worthless. For instance, I wrote The Insider Threat years ago, and I was doing 2 books a year. And the publisher, when you do 2 books a year, as soon as you hit the end of one book, they're like, I need the title, jacket copy, plot of the next book right now. And
Yeah.
I had nothing. I said, look, okay, I've got some low hanging fruit here. There's this group called the Islamic State. They're getting a lot of foreign fighters. And I think it's a pretty big threat for the United States. If a bunch of Americans went over there and trained with their blue passports, they would be a serious threat. So I'm going to write about that. Well, halfway through the book, the Islamic State became ISIS and took over Mosul and took over all of Syria and burned
Yeah.
people alive and were beheading everybody and made this enormous news. And I was like, oh no, we're going to wipe them out. My book is, it's doomed.
Yeah.
Obviously we didn't. So it worked out well. This was kind of the same thing. I was like, I don't really want to write about Ukraine because I'm not sure which way that thing's going.
Yeah.
But as I was studying the system, there, way back in Reagan's era, we had SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, as people knew it, which was basically, we're going to put these satellites in space that have the ability to knock out any missile coming into the United States. Of course, it never reached anywhere near that capability, but at the time, it scared Russia.
Yeah.
And Russia was like, that'll give them the impetus to do a first strike. They're going to do a first strike because they think they can knock our missiles out. How are we going to stop them from doing a first strike? So they created what they call the perimeter system, which was basically this. It's the very forerunner of artificial intelligence. It was a system that would test all kinds of things: atmospheric conditions, earthquakes, seismic activity, communications with various chains of command. If all these things failed, it would determine that a first strike had happened, and would launch a communication missile up that would launch all Soviet ballistic systems that were still available. They would launch, and so it was called the dead hand. And it still exists. So the dead hand was basically, you can kill us all in the Kremlin. We, in nuclear war deterrence, you've got counter value, counter force, and counter leadership. Counter value are like blowing up cities. Counter force are blowing up their missiles. Counter leadership obviously is blowing up the Kremlin. And so there's all these theories about what would happen when that happened. Well, they tried to short circuit all the theories and say, you blow up the Kremlin, you're getting missiles that we can't even control. And it was called the dead hand, and it still exists. I found out that they're still using it. And so that really piqued my interest. And I was like, that's a novel right there.
Yeah.
And so that's what I started writing. It's basically the plot of the book is there's a group of Ukrainian resistance fighters they're doing a lot of work in Ukraine, doing God's work in Ukraine. But the guy makes a decision. There's no way all these pinprick strikes, killing officers here and there and doing this is not going to solve the problem. We need to kill Putin. But he doesn't realize that by killing Putin, he's going to launch nuclear Armageddon. And so that's kind of the book.
Wow. Which seems like, and you say it still exists today, which seems like, I don't know, and maybe this is a stretch, but it seems like that would be a strategy for most nations that talk about a deterrent that
so that
happens, right?
Yeah, well, the book I altered it. The book's called The Dead Man's Hand. So Putin alters the system. The system would only initiate in the real world, even today. It would only initiate if there was a literal first nuclear strike on Russia. All these conditions have to be met. I mean, literally seismic activity, meaning some big force happened, radiological material in air, no communication between, all this kind of stuff has to fuse together for the system to say, this was a nuclear strike. So in the book, Putin alters it to just himself. And he says, I'm creating what I'm calling the dead man's hand. If I get killed, this goes off. Not a nuclear strike. Just if I fall down the stairs and hit the ground dead, there's going to be a nuclear war. And that's kind of what he did. And it's fictional in the book.
Wow. That's Brad, you always seem to have this prophetic ability to see things that are coming, or take the things that are right out of the headlines, put it into this great novel, put Pike right in the middle of it. Has DOD or the three-letter agency publishing company ever reached out and said, so Brad, you're kind of getting close?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a pre-publication review process for any agency. So the FBI has their pre-publication review, State Department has theirs, CIA has theirs, and Department of Defense has theirs. And so I meet the pre-publication review requirements for the Department of Defense, which is fiction doesn't count. I mean, because you don't know, how are you going to say I wrote a book, I used to be in a special mission unit, top secret clearance, And I wrote a book about a cop in New York City. Does that have to be reviewed? I mean, why would you review that? I was never a cop. Well, okay, say
Right.
the cop was actually a retired SF guy. Now does it have to be reviewed? Or say I wrote about a science fiction novel in the year 3030, but it's a special operations thing from the year 32. Does that have to be reviewed? It's just impossible to figure out where the cut line is.
Yeah.
But when all those tell-alls came out, No Easy Day came out, and Relentless Strike came out, and SOCOM went crazy. They're like, we're reviewing everybody. If you wrote a gardening book, you're getting
Yeah.
reviewed. And so I got reviewed, and a clean bill of health said this, there's no classified in here, because obviously I'm not going to put classified in my books. Some of the hardest things I do is trying to figure out how I'm going to capture bad guy X without using systems that I know exist. And the problem with that is, when you're back to your question, is somebody said you need to change something, there's only so many ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
So if you're describing a car, say a car was classified, and the car's got the steering wheel on the left-hand side and the gear shift and all this, and you're like, well, I want to use a car, but I'm not going to use the classified car. So I'll make steering wheel on the right, and the gear shift goes away. Now it's an automatic transmission, and we don't even have that. That's not a thing. So I can write about that. Well, I did that kind of thing. And then somebody was reading the book, because I sent it out to people who are still active, and I was on a security contract with him, actually. I had created a widget, which I won't describe, and I said, I just made this up. I know we could do it, but we haven't done it. So I just made it up, and that's what they're using. And he said, well, actually, we do have that. And since you've left the military, we've created it. And we'd like you to take that out of the book. And I did. I was like, okay, sorry.
Wow.
Because there's only so many ways you can do things. Most of the stuff I do now, I look at criminals and what are criminals doing?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out criminals are doing pretty much what used to be the bailiwick of the CIA is now all open source. I mean, it's off the shelf stuff. I mean, you can even see it in Ukraine with the DJI drones are blowing people up. So everything's off the shelf. And so when I see a criminal doing something, and I'm like, man, I'm going to use that in a book. And it turns out, so is everybody else in the intelligence age. A good example, I did a book. I had to find a way to locate a cell phone. But I didn't want to use any classified things that I know. So I'm looking around, what can I do? What can I do? And I read about these criminals in Manhattan. When you go into Starbucks with your phone, you hook up to Wi-Fi. 99.9, including myself, we won't tell the phone, your setting on the phone isn't ask me every time before I join a network I've joined before. So when I walk into my house, my phone automatically hooks to Wi-Fi. It doesn't ask me if it wants to, because I'm lazy. Most Americans are lazy.
Yeah.
Well, these criminals preyed on that laziness. If you go you were going to a Starbucks in Manhattan, getting on the Wi-Fi, looking at their stuff, they would leave the Starbucks, and at the very first intersection from the Starbucks in Manhattan, they hovered a drone, and the drone spoofed the Starbucks server, and every phone that had been in the Starbucks immediately thought they were back in the Starbucks and hooked up to the drone. And the drone then sucked all their personal information, stole their credit card information, that kind of stuff.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that was a criminal thing, but I was like, I can use that to find this phone. If I create a situation where I know that phone was in such and such place, I will spoof that thing and fly the drone around until it locks onto the phone. And I did that in the book, and it's absolutely realistic and could happen. But I did it because I read about a bunch of criminals doing it.
Wow. Well, geez, now you just now I got to stop being lazy.
Well, I still am. I mean,
geez, I didn't even know about that, Brad. So, that's what I love about these interviews too, is I get to learn something new every time. Boy, that just made me think about a lot of things. Wow, that's good.
Well, there's another one. The Roomba vacuum cleaner. So if you're doing a room clearing thing, if you're clearing a house with hostage rescue, the golden egg is to know what the floor plan is. We never trained for a floor plan. You had to do unknown floor plan, because the worst case is you have no knowledge. But if you could get a floor plan, that would really be nice to know if that door leads into a small closet or leads into a whole nother bedroom,
Yeah.
And I was running my Roomba around my house. We had a brand new Roomba, and it takes, it's used artificial intelligence, takes 4 hours to do your house the first time, and then 2 hours, and eventually it's ripping around your house in 30 minutes because it knows everything. It's bumped into all the furniture. Well, then it sends that floor plan up to the cloud, to the Roomba cloud. And once it's in the Roomba cloud, you can if I hack the Roomba, I can get the floor plan to your house. down to the furniture, down to where the chairs are in
Wow.
your house. And so that's what they do in the book. I, of course, told Roomba, no, you're not sending anything to the cloud. And I actually don't use a Roomba anymore because of that. I was like, okay, that's dangerous. But I used that in the book just because I saw what was happening. It was like, man, I can use that.
Wow. That is, oh my gosh. You know, there's you probably saw that series, but the Rabbit Hole with Kiefer Sutherland. I don't know if you saw that series or not.
No, I didn't. I thought it hadn't come out yet. Actually, I'm going to go see it. So,
Yeah, no,
I knew it was coming, but I lost track of it.
yeah. So it's there on the Paramount Network. I'm not, I don't get paid by Paramount to promote it, but it's good. I think you'll enjoy it because it is, you'll get it. You'll totally get it. And at the end of it, I was like, okay, wow. I've like you, I've gotten a little lazy on some things. That's crazy on the things that they can do with technology today. And, it's hard not to be tracked, I would say. So I love that you're taking this stuff and putting it into your books and using it to catch bad people. I think that's really cool. Tell me, what is it you want the reader to get from your books, Brad? Is it like, are you hoping it's just pure entertainment, or are you challenging people's thinking, or is it a combination of both?
I'd say it's a combination of both. My primary goal, bar none, is that the reader enjoys the story. That's what I go into writing. I want it to be, I write what I think I would like to read. And one thing I do not like when I'm reading a book is getting preached to about something.
Yeah.
So there's never any politics in the books. I'm writing book 19 right now. And I've had the same, administration going through different presidents. But the same administration, I've never said what party they're a member of. After 19 books, you don't know if they're Republican, Democrat, what are they?
Yeah.
I don't like getting preached to about things. And so I steer completely away from that on all aspects. Having said that, I do like to discuss some of the moral quandaries and some of the things that happens when you're in the military about just living, about how things actually operate. How does the national security operation or national security apparatus, how do they make decisions? How does this happen? How does that happen? And because sometimes even I was shocked. I've never been I was never high enough to be a major player where I was a speaking role, but I've been in the back of the room, in the bench seats, listening to what was going on, going, really? That's how we're making this decision?
Yeah.
And so I kind of like the moral conundrums that come in, and nothing is ever black and white, especially, even a protagonist. So when I'm creating a protagonist, I've served in a lot of bad places, and I have yet to find a literal Dr. Evil where this guy is just sitting here going, all I want to do is harm these people. That's my whole goal in life. That's not what they're trying to, once you start talking to them, they think they're the good guy.
Yeah.
They think what they're doing is righteous, even though it's heinous. And so I like to try to capture that on the page and say, look, there's, the world is not black and white. There's a lot of gray out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I do love that. And I will say that I do appreciate that about your books. I really get into, Pike, love. You talk about even the moral dilemmas that he goes through, which is really, it makes him human, right? He's not a James Bond. He's not a, he's going through some very human stuff, and the camaraderie, you capture that in the book too. It's just, the way you write, Brad, brilliant. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So the book's coming out in January 2024. But so people can pre-order it now. Where can they go?
Oh yeah. They can go, well, the old saying, the old saw, anywhere their books are sold.
Yeah.
So they literally can pre-order. If they go to my website, bradtaylorbooks.com, all the pre-orders on there for independent bookstores. I'm doing a book tour, starting January 23rd, and I'll be at tons of independent bookstores all over the United States. If they want a signed copy, they can contact any of those bookstores, and I'll sign it when I'm there, and it'll get shipped to them. So
that's great. That's awesome. Brad, always love having you on the show. Thank you for joining us today. Just so you know, you kind of froze halfway through, but your audio came in great. And
I'm looking at myself right now going, how come my head is not moving?
Yeah,
well, I'm not sure what's going on with that.
You're frozen smiling, so that's good. Yeah. Just be sure, guys, to check out bradtaylorbooks.com. Order it. You will not be disappointed. And Brad would love to have you back on again when you get another book, or even to discuss the success of this one downrange. So
Absolutely.
always enjoy having you on the show.
Absolutely. And I apologize for my web thing. I set this whole thing up 30 minutes ago. It was working fine.
Yeah. Oh, good. You know, half the time people just want to hear it anyway. They're listening to it in their cars. So it's all good. But again, thank you, Brad. Totally appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah.